Welcome everybody to our top 12 AWS security and compliance best practice webinar. Today we got some very interesting content prepared for you, especially in light of what's happening in the public cloud side from a compliance perspective, especially around GDPR. So there's a lot of activity around that. And actually just last week, we had the industry's biggest security show, RSA. Over close to 600 vendors were out there. And I walked probably 12 or 13 miles of floor space. So anyway, I'll give you a little bit of update on that as well. Just real quick while people are joining in. So lots of interest around GDPR, of course, a lot of coverage on cloud. But what's interesting was that I didn't see a whole lot of companies doing cloud automation type of checks and analysis. So, we will get into those topics specifically. Okay, so again, we're going to focus on these top 12 AWS security controls. And all of these controls are relevant to and directly mapped to GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, and of course the NIST cybersecurity control frameworks, and of course ISO 27001 as well. So definitely a lot of value in understanding these 12 controls and what they are, and how we go about them. A little bit about myself. My name is Ahmed Khan. I'm the AWS Partner Manager with the company over 3 years now, and just enjoying the growth. And actually, with me, supposed to be Kamran, who's our Director of Product Management, Security, and Compliance. Due to last-minute schedule change and conflict, so he couldn't make it, but that's okay. We will go ahead and cover that technical content as well, and I'll go ahead and just do that as well. So, with that, what we're gonna learn today, we're gonna learn a few key things. Obviously, the very first thing you must be asking, how did we come up with these top 12 controls, and what's so special about them versus goodness, I mean, AWS has hundreds of controls actually. And we're gonna dive in a little bit into Center for Internet Security Controls, because that's in a very specific focused area for AWS. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll also talk about recent AWS breaches as well, and what we can learn from that. Now, it's important because the controls that we have selected, actually, part of it are making sure that we avoid all of the breaches that we're going to talk about as a case studies. I think there's like 7 or 8 of them that we're going to cover just real quick in one slide. And then, of course, the actual controls themselves that you can implement. So these 12 controls that you can implement very quickly within your environment. And we'll talk about the effectiveness of these controls over time, and how you can monitor and manage the effectiveness of these controls. And then we'll spend about 5 minutes at the end around what we do, CloudGnosis. We focus on security and compliance, continuous monitoring and analysis and reporting, and we help you improve your cloud security posture and continuously monitor that in real time. So that's kind of what our focus area is, and then we go into the Q&A section at the tail end. So with that, let's just dive into it. So the first question is, how did we choose these top 12 best practices? And it's important to know this because so you know the framework of where we're operating from. The very first thing we do is that we obviously look at the AWS controls themselves, what they are, and what AWS is recommending as some of the key controls that you should be having. The second thing is there's a consortium called Center for Internet Security, which I'll cover in the next slide. They actually developed 44 security controls for AWS users. Okay, so we're going to take a look at that as well in detail. It doesn't cover things specifically for compliance, which is encryption and other areas. So obviously we have to look at another focus area being the compliance aspect of it, because at the end of the day, not only you want to be secure, which is the very first most thing, but secondly, you want to be compliant as well. So we look at all those controls, and then we of course pick the top 12 as a combined unit. With the fourth box that you see here is looking at the most recent hacks that are taking place, and what are some of the novel ways of getting into AWS through the back door, and running things like Bitcoin machines and things like that. So we added I believe three of those into our top 12. So that's kind of how we came up with top 12. And of course, CloudGnosis has over 150 security controls as our best practice, within our framework, within our platform, that you can leverage to really secure your cloud services. Okay. Okay, right. So let's talk about CIS just a little bit. Now, most of you may or may not be familiar with CIS. So with that, uh, specifically in the CIS, so first of all, CIS is Center for Internet Security Control, which I mentioned. It's a nonprofit entity that many of the global IT firms and companies get together to create a set of best practices for all of us to use. You can actually download this pretty easily just by Googling CIS AWS benchmarks, and it will come up with the link, and you can download. It's a 160-page file, but it's very detailed, very well explained. Uh, I just want to focus in a very one specific area of CIS, which is AWS benchmarks. Okay, not the OS hardening and other configurations that CIS offers, and many companies use that to harden operating system platforms and so on and so forth by looking at the vulnerabilities. Some of the examples of those 44 controls are here on the right side, 1 through 16. Anything from changes of policies to usage of root to S3 bucket policies being protected, and so on and so forth. So lots and lots of topics that they cover in that. And again, we're going to talk about how to make it effective, even if you have it turned on. How do you maintain a security posture that meets compliance? I'm going to take a pause here and publish a poll. It should be coming up on the right-hand side. And I just wanted to understand how many of you are using Center for Internet Security Controls for AWS benchmarks. So again, if you're using CIS for OS hardening, go ahead and vote no, even though you're using CIS, but you're only using it for OS hardening. But if you're using it for AWS benchmarks, certainly would like to know how many of you are doing that. Okay, so well, the results are 50-50, and they're still moving. Um, okay, dropped quite a bit, which more in line with what I was expecting, actually. Very interesting. Okay, so this is what I was expecting, actually. It's a very few yeses and mostly nos and don't know. Okay, all right. This gives me the state of uh, what this thing looks like. Okay. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to end the poll, and the results will be published in front of you. And for those of you who are replaying, guys, you can also see the published results as well, because we save that. Okay, so 25% of you said yes, and we have quite a few attendees today. And then 63% said no, and don't know was about 13. So roughly about 75% of you are not aware or not using the CIS AWS benchmarks. Again, please take the time out to take a look at it. In fact, while you're here live, go ahead and just Google CIS AWS benchmarks, and you'll pull that up. So these controls are very powerful. And the next slide really talks about the effectiveness. Actually, the few slides over, we'll talk about the effectiveness of this. I just put this slide up real quick for PCI and HIPAA compliance, because people do ask, hey, can you talk about compliance a little bit and how we can make our infrastructure compliant? AWS does have very good workbooks that they have published. And with that, they publish what is called cloud formation templates. And CFTs are basically what is called infrastructure as code templates that you can run, and it'll automatically generate like a 2, 3, or 3-tier architecture that you can build on top of and load your applications to make HIPAA and PCI compliant for your infrastructure. So yeah, go ahead and take a look at that. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because that's not the purpose of this webinar today. And just a quick sample of it for the PCI worksheet. What does it look like? It actually lists out the regulation name and detail and numbers, and it talks about the affected AWS services. It talks about the relevant templates that you should be using, like the template VPC management, template VPC production. So again, take a look at that offline, but I just put that in there because many of you do ask about compliance. Okay, we're gonna focus a little bit on the breach area. Why is that? Because you will understand the value of CIS 44 security controls, and you will understand the value of top 12 security controls that we're gonna talk about in a minute. So Gardner said in 2017 that 95% of all public cloud breaches will be due to customers' fault. Okay, so again, 95% of all cloud breaches will happen because of customers' fault. And you must be asking that number is very high, and is it really true? So we did our own study, and we looked at last 6 months of data, just real quick sift through, and we found out, these are the major companies anywhere, uh, Time Warner and Viacom and Dow Jones and so on. They were breached for their AWS cloud environment, and we actually dig through a little bit more which areas and sort of why this happened. So our technical analyst came back with this that most of them were S3 buckets, and they left them open. Or that they didn't have multi-factor authentication turned on, and the actual username password was compromised, and people start mining for Bitcoin and so on. And if the MFA was turned on, this wouldn't have happened. So, and the two of these um, five case studies that we have here came through third-party risks. So, which means their partners, Broadsoft and Verizon, actually left the AWS cloud open. And it's very easy to do, within the cloud infrastructure, which we'll talk about a little bit here, moving forward. So it's important to understand that if you misconfigure your cloud configurations, you will leave things open or leave it loose where people can get in, into your system. And so the question you must be asking, well, these are good companies, great security teams, don't they know the best practices and don't they follow through? The answer is yes. The problem is within any cloud infrastructure, whether it's Amazon or Azure or Google, you have hundreds and thousands of configurations in place. And then if you have infrastructure that's growing, where you have hundreds of VMs running, then it becomes almost impossible to scan for the configurations manually. And this is what's happening today, where tools haven't caught up yet, and people writing their own scripts and so on. So this kind of calls for another survey I kind of wanted to do to understand where you guys uh, where you guys are at in terms of automation. So are you using security as code, automation within your environment? So in other words, instead of having policies and procedures written, and here are the top 10 controls you should be using to protect against any malicious attack. Um, Really, what you should be doing now is writing actual code, actual security code that would actually run within the network, and it keeps running and makes sure and enforces that those policies are being managed accordingly. So the poll is right in front of you. If you guys can help me answer those, that'll be great. I think it'll be ideal. This is a new concept, but it's catching on extremely fast for those that have been running cloud infrastructure for 2 or more years. They're gravitating towards this because they have understood that the breach is happening, not because we're not careful. Well, it's because we can't keep up with the fluidity of the cloud and the changes in the cloud. So that's what's really happening. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and end the poll here real quick for the sake of time. So you see the result in front of you. So none of you said yes, which I kind of expected, or at least I expected 1 to 2% for you to say yes. And then 40% of you are planning for the near future, and 40% no, and 20% don't know. So, majority of you are again need to start thinking about delivering automation, because if you don't, you will end up in this situation, which is you got a great set of team, you got great people, a process, lots of procedures written, but you're still getting hacked because you're not doing security the new way, which is through automation. Okay, so that's important theme to understand. And also always do cloud security posture reviews through automation, not through checklist or Excel. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay, so this slide, I'm just surprised that so many out there, folks that we talk to, don't know about this. So it's called the AWS Shared Security Model. This is something directly from Amazon. Basically, Amazon says, hey, we'll take care of the cloud, meaning the infrastructure and the fences and people and so on. But anything you put inside the cloud, like your applications, firewalls, networks, and things like that, you are responsible for it. We're not going to take responsibility. You're responsible. And 100% of all the hacks that have taken place so far within the AWS environment is within the U area, which is all this blue area. Okay, and CloudGnosis protects all of these boxes, and we run continuous analysis every hour on the hour to make your cloud health alive and well, and so on. Okay, so again, the short conclusion is that cloud security is now shared responsibility. And so developers now have the power to, change infrastructure, change configurations, do what they need to do to get the job done quickly. And cloud security, most people think cloud security is, well, cloud is, people say it's safe to begin with. And then from a security aspect of it, oh, we do lots of log analysis, we do a lot of pen testing, and we harden our OSs. Okay. Yes, these are all traditionally things done, and you should still need to do that. But keep in mind that this was for the private cloud mostly. And in private cloud, this was really needed, where you don't have to worry about the rest of the things because it was taking care of it for you. But in the public cloud, and in fact, most of the breaches that we have seen so far, none of them was, I shouldn't say none because Equifax was due to OS hardening, but most of them that we have seen are due to misconfigurations of the cloud, not necessarily that they didn't pick something in log analysis, or there was a web attack or some OS hardening issue. So net, yes, these are important areas, but you need to add a top layer to this, which is infrastructure tracking, infrastructure changes, and IAM changes. And again, going back to those 12 controls that we're going to talk about just in a few slides ahead. And of course, compliance has always been costly. And quite frankly, compliance is becoming easier and easier, and so much easier, almost like a push button easy, if you have the right tools and technology in place, which is automation that drives that. So, we at CloudGnosis create those compliance reports on the fly by checking all the regulations which are needed to be checked. Okay, so at this point, I'm supposed to give up control to Kamran. He's supposed to take over and talk about these top 12 controls. And as I said, due to schedule changes, he's not here. So I'm going to jump right in. Okay, and so the very first one. Now, some of them you're gonna say to yourself, "Well, geez, I mean, I know about these, So first few of them, you probably say, "Yeah, okay, okay, fine, fine, next." But the later ones get very, very interesting and very quickly. So IAM and not the root account. Okay, so what it's saying is that Amazon has this concept of identity access management, but within that. Um, people enable root access to everything and not restrict everything. So that's very dangerous, actually. You should practically eliminate any root account access, especially to everything. And for administrative tasks like creating users and so on, you should use IAM, Identity and Access Management, and roles and responsibilities that are attached to that. And always make sure that your billing and contact information, you'll be amazed, it's very basic. It's updated and it's correct, so you can recover your account, in case of any attempts that was made earlier. So again, avoid use of root account is really what this slide is all about, what this control is all about. Okay, number two, reviewing permissions and using strong passwords. Now, permissions within AWS is actually your first line of defense. Okay, so identity and access management is how you log into your cloud services or have rights to be able to log into those services. So, making sure that IAM is set appropriately and all the groups and roles are set appropriately is critical. So within the identity account, okay, so you have users and you have groups. So let's say you have a bunch of admin groups and you want to divide these admins into separate roles. Okay, why? Because you want to control your blast radius. If let's say the sales account was breached, at least it's limited to sales account and it's not going into the rest of your Amazon accounts. So that's important. And just constantly look at how many people have unrestricted access. I mean, there are always few that have unrestricted access, and you need to make sure that additional layer of defense is turned on, which I'll talk about on the MFA side shortly. You can also use IAM policy generator and policy simulation for assistant, so just keep that in mind. Next one, number three, is enable multi-factor authentication. This is getting more and more popular. So really, okay, password strength is fine, but you want to have MFA turned on, especially for root accounts, especially for strong admin accounts. And it is available to all IAM users. You can actually turn it on for all users if you like, which is always a good practice. And MFA options are, keep in mind, token-based and text-based. So these are SMS messages, so make sure you have TLS and those things active on your mobile devices. Okay. Um, the big one here is security groups. And this becomes really out of control. We have seen in accounts where hundreds of security groups, it doesn't need to be that many. You just need to limit, and you need to look at uh, the best practices around AWS, because AWS is saying that, look, you have a web tier, application tier, and database tier, okay, for most applications. And so for web tier, you want to keep your ports 8443 open to the internet, and that's it. And for EC2 instances, if you want to have access to your VMs, then try to use SSH to get to that access, which acts as the evasion. And of course, for the database layer and for third-party access, still use SSH. And of course, AWS has one of the means to do that using a simple token service, which I'll talk about for third parties to be able to leverage that. And always make sure that your volumes are encrypted, protected from that perspective, and not open to the internet. So that's very, very important. Do not have your EBS volumes, open to the internet. Um, and again, if you have an open VPC, keep in mind it's going to affect a lot of services. Some of the services are noted here, and also have web application firewall turned on. That's getting very, very popular now because the WAF, which AWS provide, is pretty good. You should definitely have that turned on because it will actually block all these common exploits on applications like SQL injection and cross scripting and so on and so forth. So that's what this area is all about. Don't leave your front door open, which is security groups. Okay, build secure Amazon machine image. So Amazon has a concept of building a AMI, and you can actually create a template for this and register the template, and then from that you can do all kinds of launch, copy, and relaunch, and so on. So if your machine was compromised, you can actually just destroy the machine and relaunch it, and it will rebuild the infrastructure for you on the fly. You should always be disabling password-only access to host. So you should be using SSH keys, which again, people tend to forget because of laziness. They just kind of dial into the password and use it. But no, try to use SSH, especially to access the host. And that's where a lot of attacks takes place. You want to disable remote root logins, okay, which we talked about, root account logins, and really to ask yourself, do we really need to have root access? If SSH can do the trick, then go ahead and rely on that. and really ensure that only required applications and services are enabled. So there's a whitelisting process that you can have turned on to reduce, non-sanctioned applications which are running. So you can actually reduce that significantly. Number 6 is encrypt your data. Okay, so pay attention to those who are into GDPR, PII, and compliance. So encryption is pretty big within AWS, but of course you have to turn it on and you have to manage it, and you have to make sure that it stays on, and you also have to make sure that someone is not attaching an unencrypted volume with your encrypted volume. So AWS is not going to flag you for those things, but we at CloudGnosis with our platform, we check for those rules, and we would alert you right away that this is violating compliance regulations. Okay, so make sure TLS 1.3 is used. Check what version of TLS you are running. There are some deprecations, so SSL 2030 have been deprecated. So keep that in mind, your SSL, your TLS, and also use key management service to encrypt your data. So again, AWS only supports symmetric keys, which means encryption, de-encryption key is the same key. But if you require a public key and a private key process, great. AWS has support for that through third parties, or you can bring your own keys and manage that. So definitely leverage the KMS, key management process, and also enable rotation for existing, customer master key. So that's another area that you need to keep in mind. Number 7 is CloudTrail and CloudWatch. It's amazing that so many people don't have these services turned on, which we find, which is really mind-boggling, because if you can't if you can't record your activity for API and the changes on your infrastructure, then it's very hard to figure out, somebody has hacked it, or what's going on. So that's important. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but basically you turn these things on. You have to create a metric filter. Okay, just turning it on is not enough. You should create a metric filter, assign a metric, create an alarm, and that alarm will send a notification. And then, of course, once you get the notification, you have to go back into the CloudTrail to look at those events. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people think that, oh, well, we got log file turned on and we got Splunk and everything running. We are good to go on security, thumbs up. Not true. Not true. Because by the time you catch events, it's kind of late. Log file has to be generated, processed, and the correlation engine and so on. So it takes time. So you need another layer of defense that works instantly. And that's third-party products like CloudGnosis that looks at these events in real time and alert you accordingly. So keep that in mind. But importantly, you should have number 7 turned on. Okay, use of simple token service for vendors. And again, third-party risk management. So third-party risk management here, meaning that hey, my cloud is very secure. Okay, that's great. But you have third parties dialing in to access your data, to process your data that you have given access to. Well, once they access, or let's say if you gave them a copy of your data and they park it on their AWS account, how secure are they? Okay, how do you verify that they are secure? So the first thing is if they're accessing your data, your instance, then you should be using AWS Security Token Service, STS, okay? The value of STS is that it's time bound. Like it'll generate a password as a token for let's say an hour or 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and then it will expire. So within that time, your third party can access the system, scan and so on and so forth, and do whatever they need to do and exit out, and the password will expire. By the way, CloudGnosis, our platform uses this API process in the back end, and we ask the customer to generate an ARN, which is Amazon Resource Network data, which is really just a login, and it gives us this access of temporary access. And again, this is the best practice around reducing TPRM issues into your network. Now, their network and what they're doing with your data, that's something you need to ask for the CIS report, which I talked about, those 44 security controls, so you can measure them, on their progress. Okay, number 9, secure your S3 buckets. Now, this is really the number one way to kind of lose your data on the cloud. Uh, in the old days of data center, if you left your bucket open, who cares? Only your employees saw the data. I mean, if they were snooping, of course. But today, if you're in a public cloud and if you left your volume open or S3 bucket open or your disk open, everybody can see it. The entire world can see your data, which is pretty bad. So you can't say enough to not only secure your buckets by checking the access control list, checking for all the authenticated users, and 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 really make sure that your buckets are encrypted and they're also version control. That's another thing that you need to do, which is another compliance mandate, by the way, that most people miss, that you have to have that turned on. And if you don't know what's in your bucket, whether if you have privacy data or not, there's a service from Amazon called Macie, M-A-C-I-E. You can turn that on. So just don't keep it turned on forever because it's kind of expensive. You can scan it through once and see where the PII data is, and based on that, you can put some parameters and controls and encryption and so on. It definitely helps in your GDPR roadmap for sure. Okay, this is something very new and is getting extremely super duper popular, Lambda function. This is a serverless compute environment, and we're seeing hacks taking place through the Lambda function. So the two controls that you need to have on your Lambda function, first of all, is one IAM role per function. Okay, so you should not be sharing your roles for your Lambda function with other function users, because if one got hacked, at least it's not going to propagate to your other Lambda or basically compute services. So Lambda function working with users should not have access to account tables. So that's another thing you need to look at. Again, it's a technical term, account tables, but have your admin review this because that's very important. And it's getting very popular, by the way. And we use Lambda function here as well at CloudGnosis. Okay, 11, Elasticsearch service, and we recommend encryption at rest. Again, a service that's getting extremely popular within AWS, where people are using it to analyze reams of data, but they're using it as a secondary storage, object storage. So every time you have storage, you have to worry about encryption at rest, and you have to worry about that no one has access to that object storage, or limited folks have access to it. So again, access is limited, not open to public, and enable encryption. So that was number 11. Going to number 12, simple email service. It's one of the oldest service, by the way, is at AWS, and it's extremely super popular, simple email service. But we're seeing all kinds of phishing attacks. We're seeing spoofing attacks going on with SES. So the two things you need to do with SES is obviously reduce exposure of this through that the SES resources should not be available to unknown AWS account or public. So make sure you tighten that area. It should never be open to public, quite frankly. And of course, eliminate spoofing through checking the IAM controls for proper policy. So this is a policy-based resource, just like S3 or VMs and so on, or EC2 instances. I keep saying VMs, just the old days. Okay, so yeah, those two things, just want to keep that in mind for number 12. Okay, so that kind of summarizes our top 12, and you must be saying, great, I got top 12 figured out. I know what to do. I'm going to go turn this on, and I should be good and hunky-dory. Yes, for most part, it's true, but you got to talk about the effectiveness of those controls. So it's not about top 10 or CIS 44 or even our 150 controls. It's not enough. Enforcement and audit is the key. And so how do you enforce and how do you audit continuously? You should be auditing every hour on the hour. And the only way to do that is not through humans, it's through automation. So automation is a new norm now, which drives accountability and which drives even the evidence collection, for the auditors. Uh, Again, automation will do this for you. So at the end of the day, you gotta figure out, should I write all these things or should I invest in some tool or process? And that's where you need to look at some technologies. Certainly, we're one of them that can help you, with all these processes. So with that, I'm going to jump into CloudGnosis security controls and monitoring. At this point, I do have one quick last survey that I wanted to do, which is around how many of you are actually using some of these tools to do automation. Um, so if you can just kind of answer that poll on the right, that'll be great. That'd help everybody here to kind of understand the market and where everybody's going. So again, any security configuration monitoring tools outside of log monitoring. So log monitoring is not included in the survey. So if you check yes for log monitoring, I would just put that as a no. We're talking about configuration tracking and monitoring. Okay, all right, the numbers jumping quite a bit here. Okay, that is a good opportunity for me to take maybe a small breath here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and end the poll. So surprisingly, 57% do have some form of security config monitoring turned on, and 14% of you are looking at these tools. 14% no, 40% don't know. So it's about 30, 40, yeah, about 45% of you don't have anything turned on or monitored. So monitoring is very important. And again, we talked about this. Automation is the key to drive enforcement of these rules, or else you saw those great companies, which were hacked. Okay, so CloudGnosis, what do we do here? So we provide a platform that does continuous security and compliance monitoring and scanning of your infrastructure. It's agentless. It's one-click reporting. From sign up to generate a report, it's less than 5 minutes. So it runs very fast, and it can give you your audit report. So if you're looking to implement security controls or understand how well you stack against these 12 or 144 or whatever, you can actually just sign up and run a scan, basically, and be able to look at where you stand on your security posture. If you're looking to, make your infrastructure compliant with GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, or any of those controls, then we can help you with that, and we generate those pass-fail reports with all the remediation data included in that. So what do we do and how we have done this? And again, it's similar to what I just talked about initially, is that we looked at all these areas of AWS compliance, all the best practices, and then we mapped all those security controls into the regulations and actually generate those compliance reports. So, you can generate these reports in less than 5 minutes of your infrastructure. I highly recommend to, try out the product real quick. So the product itself, it's web-based, it's SaaS. There's nothing to install whatsoever, nothing to configure. And this is one of the dashboards that we show on HIPAA specifically. It shows all the risks by groups, and it also ranked them for you, obviously, high, medium, low. And it gives you the remediation data below. So if somebody hasn't rotated their password, or IAM is not turned on or something, or MFA is not turned on, it will tell you which user, which IP address, which VM, and so on has the issue, and also tells you by region as well. Sample report looks something like this. So it gives you the regulation number. It explains you what the regulation is, okay? And then it'll tell you what we found as a result. And then it'll rank it as severity. And there's another column here that's called pass or fail that's also noted. So you'll have all the information in front of you, and it'll also categorize the results as well in this PDF view, and give you a little bit of your basically attack surface is your asset list. Um, Another view on compliance side, so we'll go ahead and rate these violations for compliance. We'll map them to your geo mappings. You can actually drill down to which ones passed, failed, and why they failed, and so on and so forth. You can kind of drill down into that in detail. And in the security dashboard, we again take all the security violations, map it on a specific location where the AWS regions are, and basically divide by risks and so on and so forth. Okay, and of course, the AWS attack surface is important to know what you're running and where you're running. So we give you a view of that, and we also give you a health chart, which shows the health by risk areas. So if you wanted to see how's my networking rules are they going up and down, or are they trending downwards or upwards? You can see your health over time. And similarly, we have a concept of reducing your attack surface. This is one of the themes of our company that's unique as compared to other vendors out there. So we actually look at machines by policy that can be turned off if they're not in use. Okay, especially test dev QA machines that are horrendous for security failures because people just a little bit relax with them. And you have real data on there. So we have the ability to shut those off, let's say by 6 p.m. and bring them back up by 7 a.m. So at least 70% of the time they're shut off. And the byproduct of that is this cost report. So you actually save money if you're running on-demand instances. So that's one of the value points, but it really has a security play on it where our goal is to reduce your attack surface. That's really one of the key things that we go for. Okay, so we're kind of at the tail end here. We're going to open up the floor for Q&A just in a second. I wanted to understand, just to kind of give you, a snapshot of what we learned today. So cloud security is shared responsibility, which we know. Automation is key, which we talked about. That if you want the best security and compliance process, then definitely, you need to basically have some form of, automation turned on. Third-party risk management, it's not just you, it's your data going somewhere or someone accessing your system. You need to enforce the CIS AWS benchmarks on on your third parties as well, because if you're going to use it, then you have to have your third party use it as well. Okay, so DevOps, we didn't touch a whole lot on DevOps, but basically you need to keep them accountable for security, but it's only going to happen through automation. It's just not going to happen by itself. You just tell them, here's a list of policies to follow. They're not going to follow. Then they need to see, they need to see automation built in. Monitor your progress through KPI. It's best if you have automation in place. You can do that automatically and have alerts on them. Definitely learn the CIS benchmarks. And again, 70% of you said you don't know, so definitely invest the time. If nothing else you learn from here, pick up that CIS rule book and just read it and just say, wow, we really got to have these things turned on. Okay, and also very important, create a baseline. Uh, Baselining meaning that where am I from a maturity cycle, and how's my security posture? You can do it through spreadsheets and check marks and things like that, which takes a lot of time. Or you can just simply click a button and in 2 minutes, you got your security baseline benchmark report in front of you that tells you exactly what's wrong with your cloud infrastructure, how you can fix it, and where do you stand. So those things, I just want to kind of wrap it up and open the chat for any questions and comments. Okay, so I have a question from Chris saying, will these slides be made available following the webinar? The answer is yes. This webinar is recorded and you'll be sent a link for a replay. And we also kind of convert that link, audio video stuff, into YouTube. And we also have a YouTube channel as well that we park our webinars there. And I also highly recommend to look at our previous webinars when, especially areas like GDPR and HIPAA and things like that. We have some great content there. Okay, question about how does your product handle cross scripting and SQL injection? So our product doesn't do that. What our product does works outside. We work at the infrastructure layer, not at the application traffic layer. That's what the traditional security tools were built for, and that's what they do. So you still have to rely on OWASP testing for that. We operate outside of that, which is the infrastructure layer. So meaning all the configuration of your volumes, your EC2s, your IAM policies, and things like that. So case in point for that, for example, we would check to see if the web application firewall is turned on or not for your infrastructure. And we would tell you that this is a medium risk. You should turn that on. So why? Because you can reduce SQL injection and cross scripting. So those are things that we can help you with, but not necessarily directly in testing that, because that's not our function. Okay, a question around can you test my infrastructure for encryption and NIST 853 rulebook framework? The answer is yes to that. Of course, we do very detailed checking on elastic load balancers. We check the cipher levels if they're weak, strong. We check the version of those ciphers. So we check for all those things. We check for volumes that are encrypted or not. And we check, well, not only that, we check the life cycle of the volumes. We check things like a versioning that's important for your data integrity piece that's needed for PCI and HIPAA. For 853, it is a lot of line items. We check for quite a few of them that are related to infrastructure. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, so another question around, um, you know, let me just see how to kind of rephrase this. So the question is around, uh, exactly how does your platform checks all these things? Well, so first of all, we are an Amazon partner, technology partner, and so all the APIs are obviously licensed to us, and we use it in a secure method through this SNS process, this secure token service process that we talked about. Sorry, the SDS process. And so with that, we pull all the machine data, all the metadata, and when we have all that every hour in the hour, we analyze against our best practices that are in the library and compliance and all of that. And from there, we can, we can report on. So that's kind of what we do. We don't really go inside of your volumes or EC2s because, first of all, we don't have rights to do that. There's a policy that we give you that you attach to our IAM role, and that's kind of how we manage that. Okay, questions around. Okay, what's more secure, LDAP versus SSH keys? So, I mean, it really depends on folks that you talk to. Um, I believe, in my technical opinion, and again, I'm not a very technical person, though I have an electrical engineering degree, it doesn't mean anything in nowadays. So SSH keys, I would say, is the most preferred method in connecting remotely, especially cloud resources. And the reason I say that is because AWS themselves are recommending this method for that. They're not saying, go through your IAM process and give them root access, let them log in freely. No, they're saying still use SSH keys. So hopefully that that answered that one. Uh, okay, question around goodness. So this has to do with around how do you license and price your product. I mean, we're actually pretty simple. We just say, hey, if you have a login, username, password of IAM that you enter into our portal. And we don't care if you have one VM that's running in that account or if you have 100,000 VMs. Price is the same, which is roughly about $100 per month, per AWS account. So it's like $1,200 per year. I mean, it's very, very cheap, very low cost. So I mean, it's very low cost protection, quite frankly, and you have access to all of our HIPAA PCI reports, and we keep adding reports. We will be adding GDPR report very shortly. We're just getting about done with that, so just keep an eye on for it, or just send me an email or ping me, and I can provide more information around that. Okay, I think we covered quite a few things. Are there any other questions you guys can? I mean, there's a lot of there's questions here that I think are covered by the slides. I don't want to reiterate those because it's gonna become a long session for everybody. Uh, but questions that are really out of the ordinary, those are the ones that I'm looking for. that I should be able to answer. I'm just kind of skipping through here. And again, if something that you really need to get answered, please just send me, send us an info at or sales at cloudgnosis.com. We will absolutely one-to-one get it answered for you to your complete satisfaction. And again, like I said, if you want to try out the product 14 days free, no one's going to bug you. Just go ahead and open a trial and start analyzing your infrastructure, generate reports free of charge. It's a full up license. We don't limit it in any way. Okay. So with that, thank you all for attending and look for our next webinar. We do one webinar a month. And we tend to kind of really focus on some hard topics. So I came from RSA. I saw a few things that I observed, and I was going to go talk to our product marketing and discuss about a specific webinar around that topic. So stay tuned, and thank you, and have a great day. Signing off from Atlanta.